You were never meant to hear this story, and once you do, you will never unhear it. Sealed behind Vatican walls, buried under 150 years of red tape, misdirection, and silence. There are names, 17 of them, that do not appear in the Church's records after 1862, not because they died, not because they left, but because they were erased, and not metaphorically. For over 2 decades, Sacred Heart Seminary, tucked deep in the rolling isolation of Illinois prairie, trained the future of American Catholicism, but behind its stained glass windows and incense-thick chapels, something else was happening, something darker. 17 young men walked into that place with holy ambition and were never seen again. No funerals, no graves, no explanations. And for 150 years the Church said nothing, except one phrase written again and again in fading ink across yellowing ledgers, transferred to undisclosed mission. But there were no missions, because there were no priests left to send. Tonight I'll take you into the cold marrow of history, not the kind you learned in school, but the kind that institutions bury beneath layers of doctrine and deception. This is not entertainment, this is exposure. What you're about to hear will either wake something ancient inside you, or drive you to turn this off before you see too much. Because once you start descending, there is no return. This isn't just a story about vanished priests. It's about a machine, an engine of control that wore the robes of piety while feeding on obedience. A system designed not to elevate the soul, but to erase it. Sacred Heart Seminary was a spiritual slaughterhouse masquerading as salvation. And those who disappeared were not victims of chance. They were selected. And you were meant to forget them. But I won't let you. Not tonight. Because buried underneath the stained carpet of sacred here, beneath the old oak chapel floor, were letters never meant to be read. One in particular addressed to a man who never existed, a man named Father Edmund Walsh, a man who was never a priest. And that's where we begin. He arrived in the dead of winter, 1846, tall, gaunt, wrapped in a long black overcoat that dragged across the frozen Illinois soil like mourning cloth. Locals said his eyes were the color of wet slate and just as cold. His name was Father Edmund Walsh, but there's no baptismal record, no seminary graduation, no priestly assignment from Ireland or anywhere. He just appeared. Carrying forged documents, fluent in Latin, quoting scripture with surgical precision. To the Bishop of Chicago, he was a gift, an educated European willing to tame the American frontier for Christ. To the wealthy Catholic donors of Chicago and Milwaukee, he was the image of spiritual sophistication, and to the Vatican, he was nobody. But that was the plan, because Father Walsh wasn't alone. With him came 2 others, Father Thomas Murphy and Dean Patrick O'Brien, both equally eloquent, both allegedly scholars of theology and canon law, and both, like Walsh, ghosts in every clerical archive that should have confirmed their existence. They weren't priests, they weren't scholars. They were something else, something that doesn't kneel to crosses but hides behind them. From the start, Sacred Heart Seminary was a theater of illusions, every window dressed in Gothic grandeur, every corridor echoing Latin hymns. But behind the pageantry was an operation, something cold, calculated, and disturbingly efficient. The 3 men ran the place like a corporation of silence, and the students? Assets, inventory, chattel. The first class of Sacred Heart arrived in autumn 1847, 12 young men from devout Catholic families, idealistic, obedient, eager, some from immigrant bloodlines, others converts, but all chosen for 3 things: money, usefulness, and isolation. Those who didn't fit that mold were never accepted, and those who did never returned. The seminary imposed absolute control. Letters home, benito it in, sword. No one entered or exited without permission, and every movement was logged, tracked, and spiritually justified. Dissent wasn't punished, it was purged. Obedience wasn't encouraged, it was demanded. Father Walsh's sermons were laced with fire. He spoke of damnation not as possibility, but certainty should any man question his role. To disobey him was to disobey God himself. One student later said, "When Father Walsh looked at you, it was like you didn't exist anymore unless he allowed it." But the truth is, Edmund Walsh had killed before. And if the letters discovered beneath the chapel floorboards are real, he didn't come to America to lead men to God. He came to trade them. It happened in silence, but the silence was too perfect, too rehearsed. February 1848. The heart of an unforgiving Illinois winter. Snow piled so high it swallowed entire fences. Roads disappeared, and inside Sacred Heart Seminary, the air was heavy with incense. And something else, something colder than ice. Michael Brennan was the first. 22 years old, son of a prosperous Irish grocer in Chicago, brilliant, faithful, the kind of seminarian any bishop would brag about. He'd been handpicked by Father Walsh for special assignments, administrative tasks, they said, financial records, paper trails, things priests don't normally entrust to students. But Michael was different. That's what they all said, until he vanished. The story given to the students was noble, inspiring. Walsh announced it during morning mass. Michael had left in the night to minister to cholera victims in Iowa, a brave act of priestly sacrifice, but even in 1848 something felt off. There was no carriage, no escort, no goodbye. And when his roommate, Joseph Kennedy, opened their shared wardrobe that morning, Michael's boots were still there, his thick winter coat, his gloves, his grandmother's silver rosary, every item a man would need to survive the sub-zero frontier, left untouched, especially that rosary. Michael never removed it, not once, not even to sleep. Joseph asked questions, quietly, cautiously, but when he brought them to Father Walsh, something changed. The friendly gaze disappeared. Walsh's face turned stony, as if carved from cathedral granite. He accused Joseph of pride, of spiritual rebellion, for questioning divine authority. And his punishment? Solitary prayer, in the basement chapel. What looked like penance was a silencing. That underground room, damp and freezing, became Joseph's prison. But down there, beneath the seminary, he heard things. Wheels on gravel, hooves scraping ice, voices, always the same three, and the creak of a wagon being loaded with something heavy. On the third night, Joseph looked through the tiny basement window and saw it, 3 men lifting a long wrapped bundle into the wagon, carefully, quietly, lovingly. That was the part that haunted him most. It wasn't luggage, it wasn't supplies, it was Michael. And Joseph Kennedy realized Michael Brennan hadn't left to serve cholera victims. He had been offered. There was a door in Sacred Heart Seminary that no one was allowed to touch. It wasn't locked with iron, it wasn't guarded by men, it was protected by something much older, fear. A quiet, invisible rule enforced not by words but by glances, by pauses in conversation, by the sudden change in tone when anyone got too close. It was located 3 floors down, past the library annex, beyond the cellar kitchens, where the stone walls narrowed and the air grew damp with the stench of mildew and wax. The staircase ended in a hallway that wasn't listed on any blueprint. No oil lamps hung there. The few students who wandered that deep by mistake said the candles they carried would flicker violently or go out entirely. At the end of that hallway was a single black door, unmarked, no knob. Only Father Walsh had the key, and he wore it around his neck, tucked beneath his cassock like a relic. He called it the scriptorium, though no one ever saw a single book enter or leave. And yet, every Friday night after Vespers he would descend into the dark with a bundle of letters and return before dawn, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice hoarse, his sermons more venomous. The faculty pretended not to know, or maybe they truly didn't, because those chosen by Walsh to become assistants were always warned, never ask about the scriptorium, ever. Joseph Kennedy, after witnessing Michael's disappearance, grew obsessed. He began mapping the seminary in secret, marking hidden corridors, listening through air vents, and finally, on a storm-heavy Thursday night, he slipped away during confession and followed Father Walsh from a distance. What he saw, he would later describe in a letter that was buried beneath the chapel floorboards. It was not a room, it was a chamber, with walls covered in veils stitched with symbols I do not recognize. There were bones, human I believe, arranged in patty, bones that looked like constellations, and on the floor, 17 black robes laid out as if waiting for their owners. But most horrifying of all was the altar. It wasn't Catholic. Joseph was caught. The next morning he was gone, The official record said he'd returned to Boston to care for his ill mother, but Joseph's mother had died 2 years earlier, and another seminarian, Henry Dupont, wrote in his diary, "Joseph's bed was cold, but his rosary was still under the pillow. Just like Michael, just like the others. And the scriptorium, it was never found again. Because when the seminary was renovated in 1852, the entire lower level was sealed off, brick by brick. And that door, it's no longer there. But the smell still lingers. By 1851, fear had its own scent inside Sacred Heart Seminary. It smelled like wet limestone, old wax, and something bitter, metallic. The remaining students whispered of disappearances as if they were acts of God, punishments for doubt, disobedience, or secret sin. But behind the ritual, the Latin and the polished gold chalices, something ancient was growing, and it wore the garments of liturgy. That year, a new tradition was introduced by Father Walsh, the Midnight Expiation, a private, invitation-only mass held once every new moon. Students selected were told they had been spiritually advanced and chosen to witness a holier rite, one that transcended earthly understanding. But those students were never seen again. One of them, a gifted seminarian named Thomas Alvarado, left behind a journal hidden inside the cavity of a pew, discovered in 1902 during restoration. The final entry was dated November 2nd, 1851. "Tonight I was chosen. Father Walsh said I have been called to taste the higher sacrament. He smiled with such warmth I wept, but when I asked what I should wear, he simply said, 'Bring nothing, you will be clothed anew.'" That was Thomas's last word. A week later, his name was scratched out of the seminary roster, not erased, scratched, with a blade, deep enough to gouge the paper. And those who asked about him, sent away, branded unfit, spiritually unstable, or worse, declared heretical sympathizers and excommunicated. Then came the rumors of what happened during the midnight expiations, candlelight from below the chapel flickering through cracks in the floor, sounds that did not belong to any known mass, moaning chants in languages older than Latin, the scent of burning parchment and iron. A janitor named Elias Crane, one of the few lay workers allowed in the seminary, claimed he once found a candle still burning near the pulpit the morning after an expiation. Its wick was soaked in something red. He left the grounds that same day, no letter of resignation, no final pay, just his name scratched, like Thomas's, from all records. But the most disturbing clue came decades later. In 1884, after the seminary's final closure, a surveyor found beneath the old altar a shallow cavity lined with marble tiles and stained. He sent a sample to a laboratory in Chicago. The report, long buried in diocesan files, was brief. The substance is human blood, multiple donors, old, possibly ritualistic. And on one tile, a name had been etched, Thomas Alvarado. Next to it, a date, November 2nd, 1851. The seminarians were required to memorize all 150 psalms. It was standard theological discipline. Recitation tests were weekly. Mistakes earned silence, reflection, or punishment. But there was a 17th psalm, one not found in any Bible, whispered in dark corners, traded like contraband between trembling hands. They called it the Psalm of the Veil. Its verses were never written, only spoken, a chain of syllables that made the tongue ache, the throat tighten. Those who heard it said it didn't feel like speaking, it felt like inviting. The first known mention of it appeared in 1846, in the confession journal of Father Roland Meeks. A boy recited strange words before collapsing. He called it Psalm 17. He said it came to him in sleep, but I swear, it came from something older. That boy, Daniel Lemoyne, died 3 days later from convulsions. His body, according to an undertaker's note, was twisted, as if turned from the inside out. The coroner refused to sign the certificate. His replacement labeled it, cause unknown, potential spiritual disturbance. Daniel was buried in unconsecrated ground. Years later, Father Walsh resurrected the phrase in one of his private sermons. Witnesses claimed he began chanting in a language not Latin, not Greek, yet eerily rhythmic, until the crucifix above the altar fell, breaking in two. Then, silence. Father Walsh smiled and continued the Mass. From that night onward, Psalm 17 became a tool of terror. Students who disobeyed were awakened at 3:17 a.m. and marched barefoot to the chapel crypts. There, in candlelight, they were made to repeat the psalm verse by verse until their voices broke or their minds did. One boy, Peter Langston, ran screaming from the crypt in 1850. He was later found behind the seminary gardens, blind, shivering and clawing at the soil. He lived, but he never spoke again. His hands remained curled into fists until his death in 1903. And yet, the psalm lingered. In 1931, a cleaning woman discovered scratchings beneath the choir pews. 17 lines, each carved into the wood with a stylus or nail. The language was untranslatable, but matched the phonetic pattern Father Meeks once described. The church ordered the pews burned, but legend says the fire wouldn't catch. It wasn't until the entire chapel was doused in blessed oil and torched that the wood finally gave in. The flames were said to whisper, and the whisper sounded like weeping. In the dead of winter, January 1853, the bell tower of Sacred Heart Seminary began to ring at ungodly hours. Not noon, not vespers, not even matins, but 3:17 a.m., the hour of Psalm 17. No one was assigned to the bell. No one confessed to climbing the icy stone ladder, and yet every third night the sound would echo down the valley, slow, mournful, metallic and hollow, as though struck by something not of flesh. The seminary's rector, Father Calhoun, ordered the doors to the tower sealed. A metal cross was fastened across the hatch, and the rope removed entirely. Still, the bell rang, and then they saw him. A groundskeeper named Jericho Ross claimed he saw a figure, bone-thin, wrapped in what looked like altar cloth, hanging upside down from the tower's spire, swinging into the bell with its forehead, over and over. Its face was hidden by a funeral veil. Its arms were folded over its chest like a corpse at burial. Jericho never returned to the seminary. He left behind his coat keys and a half-eaten meal. 2 weeks later, another witness, Sister Imelda, who worked in the infirmary, said she saw the same figure during a storm. Lightning revealed it in full, feet bound in rosary beads, eyes glowing faintly red, mouth stitched shut with gold thread. That night the bell didn't ring. Instead it screamed. Students covered their ears, priests clutched relics, and windows cracked from the force of it. And from then on, every priest who had attended the midnight expiations began to suffer strange afflictions, nosebleeds, tremors, blackouts during prayer. Some were found facing the corner of their rooms, mumbling to a presence only they could see. Father Calhoun, once a man of towering presence, was found kneeling before the tower, face lifted toward the sky, whispering, "I hear the word made flesh, and it rings like iron." He was removed from his position, sent to a sanatorium in Buffalo. His final written note, smeared with blood, read, "The bell does not need hands, it needs witnesses." After that, students stopped looking toward the tower. The seminary quietly forbade any mention of the bell. But survivors later said, "The sound was never loudest outside. It was loudest inside your bones." Every seminary had its rooms, dormitories, libraries, refectories. Sacred Heart had them too, on the surface, but hidden between the chapel and the archives, there was another. It had no name, no number, no official key. The older seminarians called it the breathing room, not because it helped them breathe, but because they swore when the door was closed, it breathed. In 1855, a first-year postulant named Adrian Bellows got lost during evening prayers. He turned a corner too soon, found himself in a dark hallway that shouldn't have existed. The corridor bent unnaturally, sloping downward toward cold. He heard it before he saw it, a slow inhale, wet, deep, mournful. At the end of the hall stood a door, plain wood, iron handle, no sign. He opened it. What he described next was never written in seminary records, but his personal letter to his brother survives. He wrote, "There were no candles, but I could see. The walls were soft, pulsing, veined like skin. There were teeth, not human, in the corners. Something sat in the center of the room, wrapped in black cassocks stitched together. I tried to speak, but it knew my name before I said it. Adrian was expelled days later. The official reason: heretical delusions. But whispers say he clawed his own tongue out during morning mass. In 1872, a carpenter doing repairs discovered a door sealed shut with 27 nails and red wax. His assistant removed the wax, opened the door, and screamed. He fled the grounds barefoot, never worked again. The carpenter stayed behind, curious. They found his body weeks later, folded into the confession booth. Spine shattered, mouth open, nothing inside. No tongue, no teeth, just parchment. A page from the Gospel of Mark, soaked in bile, bearing a single sentence scrawled in Latin, and the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom. After that, Sacred Heart updated its architectural plans. The hallway was removed, the foundation filled with salt and sealed in concrete. But some said the room didn't need space to exist. It simply waited for invitation. To this day, former students report dreams of that hallway. Some wake with dirt under their fingernails, others with nosebleeds. One man claimed he still heard it, 40 years later, breathing beneath his floorboards. He arrived without ceremony. No procession, no blessing, not even a letter of introduction from the diocese. Just a cold January morning in 1857, and a man in a black cassock stepping down from a carriage that no one saw arrive. Father Edmund Walsh. No record of ordination, no parish of origin, no baptismal certificate. Yet the moment he stepped onto the grounds of Sacred Heart, the air changed. The seminarians said he didn't blink, ever. His eyes were grey like wet ash. His sermons were whispered, not spoken, and though he taught theology, no one remembered what he actually taught. Only the silence that followed. He kept no quarters of his own, slept in the crypt beneath the chapel, where the bones of dead bishops lay. Every morning he emerged clean, pressed, untouched by dust or decay. And then came the book. Bound in black leather, locked with 3 clasps, kept always at his side. When students asked what it contained, he said, "Not prayers, not secrets, just a record of names, men who must be remembered, because the world intends to forget them." But there were no page numbers, no dates, just names, some crossed out, some rewritten in reverse, some burned away entirely, leaving only a shadow on the parchment. By 1859, students began to disappear again. Always the same pattern: a private audience with Father Edmund, a walk into the old vestry, then nothing, no farewells, no luggage, no investigation, just a name added to the book. One priest, Father Juno, tried to follow them. He claimed he saw Edmund open a passage behind the altar, a door in the wall that wasn't stone but breathing flesh. He reported it to the archdiocese. 3 days later, his heart was found still beating, inside a locked tabernacle. No blood, no wounds, just the organ, pulsating, humming with a rhythm that didn't match any human cadence. After that, no one spoke Edmund's name aloud. But then, in 1861, the book vanished. So did Edmund. All that remained in the crypt was a single cassock nailed to the stone floor and a parchment pinned beside it that read, "The record is not gone. It is inside you now. You will remember them or you will become them." Some say he was never a priest. Others say he was the last real one. But those who knew his name dream in Latin now. In 1872, the final bell rang at Sacred Heart Seminary. Not the chapel bell, but another, hidden deep beneath the building in a sub-level that didn't officially exist. Its chime was not of bronze or brass, but of something older, bone perhaps, or hollow stone. 17 times it tolled, 1 for each priest who had vanished. Then, silence. That night the seminary burned, but not by fire, not by any earthly means. The structure remained, but everything inside turned to ash, paper, cloth, flesh. Yet no flames touched the stone. The church claimed an electrical fault, despite electricity not reaching Sacred Heart until 1903. What truly happened that night is pieced together from fragments, surviving journal pages, hidden diocesan letters, and the memory of one man, Brother Eli Tompkins, who was found 40 miles away the next morning, barefoot, blind, and singing a lullaby in ancient Aramaic. He lived for 7 more years, never spoke English again, but every day, at exactly 3:33 a.m., he cried out the same phrase, "They never left, they're under us." When authorities excavated the seminary ruins in 1880, they found 17 recesses beneath the chapel floor. Not graves, pods, lined with velvet, etched with sigils predating Catholicism. Each contained nothing. No bodies, no bones, only garments, folded perfectly, preserved impossibly. And in the center of each, resting on the cloth, was a tooth. Not human, not animal, polished, marked with what looked like scripture too complex for the eye to follow, like the language was trying to rearrange itself the longer you stared. They sealed the site in 1891, poured 7 tons of concrete, erected a new chapel, buried it again. But things don't stay buried. In 2003, construction crews expanding the diocesan archives accidentally cracked through the outer wall. What poured out wasn't air, but salt water, thick, warm, and humming. 7 men resigned that day. One was later institutionalized after reportedly carving 17 names into his chest, names he claimed had been spoken to him from the water, names that matched those in Father Edmund's black record. The church said it was groundwater seepage, but the ground doesn't sing. Now, in 2025, Sacred Heart is nothing but a footnote, its legacy sterilized by bureaucracy. But if you dig deep enough, if you find the right names, you'll start to see it. A pattern, a system, a hunger. The 17 were not lost. They were taken, offered to something we've forgotten how to name. And tonight, their silence breaks. Because you've heard it now, the bell, the breathing, the beginning of the end. Welcome to the reckoning. The first time Father Edmund heard it, he thought it was the wind. A low hum beneath the chapel, pulsing like a distant heartbeat. But wind doesn't whisper in syllables. By 1873, months after the seminary accident, that sound began to surface more frequently, not just at night, but during Mass, during confession, during prayer. It mimicked Latin, but wasn't Latin, mimicked chant, but carried no melody. It was a language older than Scripture, older than sin, and it spoke through the walls, through the pews, through the flesh of the faithful. The younger priests heard it first, and they didn't react in fear. They listened. They answered. Brother Corwin began writing entire sermons in glyphs no one recognized. Father Mikhail fasted until he collapsed, murmuring phrases no one had taught him. And Brother Elias, once the most gentle among them, slaughtered every bird in the seminary garden one morning at dawn. When confronted, he simply whispered, "It told me the sky was watching. It told me to blind it." Father Edmund tried to record the voices using a wax cylinder phonograph. The playback produced only wet breathing and the sound of stone grinding against teeth. He buried the recordings in the seminary cellar, beneath a slab carved with Psalm 91. 2 days later, the slab was shattered. The cylinders were gone. But something else was found in their place. A page from Father Edmund's own journal. He swore he had never written it. And yet it was in his handwriting, dated a week in the future. It read, "On the 11th night they begin to sing. Once you hear the choir, it's too late." And just as it warned, on the 11th night, every bell in the seminary began ringing. Not in harmony, in cacophony, each one tolling a different name. 17 bells, 17 voices, none belonging to the living. The church responded by placing the seminary under Lentum C. Lentium, the silent Lent, a protocol used only in cases of heresy, demonology, or miracles too dangerous to reveal. No Mass, no visitors, no exit. They sealed the chapel doors with red wax and chained the cellar shut. But silence cannot stop a song that lives in the blood, and the song had already chosen its next verse. Father Edmund did not sleep, not because he feared what waited in his dreams, but because he feared what might wake up inside him. Each night after the bells, the air inside Sacred Heart grew thick, not with incense, but with breath breath that didn't belong to anyone in the seminary anymore. It clung to the walls, fogged the glass of the Stations of the Cross, and whispered names that no living person should have known. Then came the voices, not from outside, not even from the chapel, but from the priests themselves. One by one, they began to mouth the same chant, perfectly synchronized, though none of them were conscious. They'd sit upright in their beds at 3:13 a.m. exactly, eyes closed, lips moving. The sound was low, hollow, mechanical, no emotion, no inflection. A single phrase, over and over again. Fiat lux, et lux fuit, et lux consumsit. Let there be light. And there was light, and the light consumed. It was not scripture. When Father Edmund confronted them in daylight, they remembered nothing, but their fingernails were worn down to the flesh. Some had gouged lines into the wooden bedposts, perfect circles, 7 concentric rings. On the 7th night, Father Mikhail opened his mouth mid-sermon, and a voice not his own echoed from the rafters. Not deeper, not distorted, duplicated, like a choir singing in unison through his single throat. The congregation ran, but the doors wouldn't open. The sanctuary windows, all 13, blackened from the inside as if scorched by invisible fire. And above the altar, the crucifix began to weep, not blood, ash. When it ended, Mikhail collapsed. His face was frozen in a silent scream, eyes missing, lips sewn shut from the inside, and in his hand, a single strip of skin, peeled from his chest. Carved into it with a communion knife were the same Latin words, but this time reversed. Et lux consumsit, et lux fuit, fiat lux. The light consumed, then there was light. Let there be light. They were building something, not a religion, not a ritual, a resonance, a frequency that could hollow out the soul and leave only submission behind. And those who could hear it were already gone. They always believed the foundation of Sacred Heart was solid, until Brother Corwin vanished during morning prayer right in front of 7 witnesses. One blink, and he was gone. No sound, no scream, just an open space where he'd been kneeling seconds before. A faint smell of burning parchment lingered in the air. They searched the grounds, the cloister, the tower, even the sealed cellar. But he was nowhere, until someone remembered the drawings in his cell. Dozens of floor plans, maps etched in soot on parchment, each one slightly different. Not of the seminary as it stood, but of what lay beneath it. A labyrinth, circular, organic. Not built by hands, but grown, like roots. With Father Edmund's reluctant blessing, a search was conducted. By lantern, they descended into the crypt through a disused ossuary shaft behind the altar. What they found was not of church record. Tunnels, endless coiling passageways lined with graven stones, not Roman, not Celtic, untranslated. And the walls were warm, some pulsed. Beneath the seminary was a living architecture, and within it, the priests found remnants. Not bones, not clothing, but robes, intact and standing upright, as if still worn. 17 sets, all facing inward toward a hollow pit where the stone spiraled down like a drain. At the bottom, a pool of liquid so black it reflected nothing. Brother Elias leaned too close. His lantern flickered, and in that instant, they all saw it. Reflections in the water, of men who were no longer there. Each priest stared into the pool and saw a version of himself, screaming, praying, burning. Elias whispered, "It's the mirror. It's where they go when they're taken." That was the last coherent thing he ever said. After being pulled from the tunnels, he clawed out both eardrums and attempted to cut out his tongue with a rosary crucifix. They confined him in the infirmary U and a 24-hour watch. He never slept, but he hummed, the same tune the others had mouthed during their night trances. When the archdiocese was informed, Vatican representatives responded with a single directive: do not dig, do not speak, do not gaze. A week later, the entrance to the ossuary shaft was bricked over, but from the chapel floor above, a soft thumping could still be heard beneath the pews, like knuckles rapping against stone, one beat for each name forgotten. When Father Edmund sent his final report to Rome, he expected resistance. What he didn't expect was a courier arriving in the dead of night, not with answers, but with a key. No name, no instruction, just a leather-bound Bible hollowed out to hide the cold iron skeleton key inside. And etched into the spine in Latin, non omnis moriar, I shall not wholly die. The key opened a door no one had ever noticed before, behind the sacristy, beneath a tapestry of St. Jerome, a door that, according to the blueprints, did not exist. Inside, a chamber of mirrors, 13 of them, each one exactly 7 feet tall, placed in a perfect circle, and draped in red cloth. Beneath their feet was a seal, not of the church, but of something older, a snake swallowing its tail. But the tail was made of rosary beads, and the head bore a crown of thorns. The mirrors were not reflective. They were absent, pitch black, like portals that hadn't been turned on yet. Father Edmund stepped inside the circle and immediately heard his name spoken backwards, then forwards, then in a voice that was his, but not from him. And then all 13 mirrors began to hum in unison, like tuning forks, like prayer bowls, but deeper, below hearing. He reached toward one, and it breathed. The glass fogged as if exhaling. He backed away, but the mirror leaned forward. Whatever had been sealed behind it was no longer dormant. He locked the chamber, burned the tapestry, never spoke of it again. But it was too late. Each mirror began appearing in the dreams of the remaining priests. They'd wake up at 3:13 a.m., soaked in sweat, whispering names from a forgotten tongue. One priest scratched the mirror's shape into his own chest using a communion wafer, hardened like stone. Then, one by one, the last 5 priests began to vanish, always after prayer, always in silence, always without a trace. 17 priests who had heard the hum. 17 who had stared too long into something older than Scripture. Rome never responded again. The seminary was shuttered, but not exorcised, because even the Vatican knew you can't banish what was here before Christ. The Sacred Heart Seminary was sealed in 1952. Official cause, structural instability and declining enrollment. Unofficially, it had become a wound, a place where time and theology bent under the weight of something unwritten. But the story doesn't end there, because 2 weeks ago in a Vatican archive labeled Extinct Orders Class 7, a forgotten record surfaced. It was a confession, bound in red string, signed by Father Edmund J. Rousseau, dated November 3rd, 1946. Inside were 17 names, locations, and precise times of disappearance, each annotated with liturgical symbols and a recurring phrase, vocati sed non redunt, they are called but do not return. Edmund's final entry described a vision, a dream that began after the 13th disappearance. He saw a table, set for Mass, but the chalice bled black, and the host was made of flesh that whispered. He claimed each priest was not taken randomly, each had been chosen, marked by an inverted anointing, done in secret, passed unknowingly from hand to hand. A heretical rite whispered within the oldest Catholic sects, the Watchers of the Ninth Hour. An order so secret that even the Inquisition burned only rumors of their name. They believed in a truth older than Eden, that Christ was not the first sacrifice, only the final one, and that under every holy place, beneath the gold, beneath the stone, beneath the relics and incense, there is still a mouth that feeds on faith unspoken, prayers abandoned, sins confessed without penance. Father Edmund ended his confession with one last note. The seminary was built on the wrong site, not holy ground, but hungry ground. I did not fail to protect them. I only realized too late that we were the offering. That document has since vanished, removed from the archives, replaced with a blank page. But copies exist, buried, hidden. Among the exorcists, T. Inhuan, he archivists, the dying. And you, now, you've heard it too. 17 priests, 20 years, One place that swallowed them whole, the Sacred Heart Seminary, is still standing, boarded up, fenced in, ignored. But every night just before 3:13 a.m., the ground shifts, the bricks hum, and sometimes the pews creak as if someone sits, waiting,